Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'suk b'divrei Torah. V'arivna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha v'finu b'fi b'cha Beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tze'etzenu v'tze'etzei b'cha Beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai l'mei Torah l'amo Yisrael.
Amen. Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'chabanu mikol amim v'natanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Blessed art you, Adonai, God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Adonai, God, sweeten the words of your Torah in the mouth and in the mouth of your people, the family of Israel. May we and our offspring and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed art you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people, Israel.
Amen.
Blessed art you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who selects us from all people and gave us his Torah. Blessed art you, Adonai, giver of the Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
Okay. Kevin, take it away.
Here we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, so it's now the part 14, chapter 4, no, part 14. Okay. You shall rebuke your neighbor and you shall not bear sin because of him. And this comes from Vayikra. The verse prohibits us from embarrassing others even when privately delivering rebuke. Rebuke must be delivered in a tactful manner that will not cause shame. If you speak Lashon Hara about a person in his presence and cause him shame, you violate this prohibition. If you shame someone in public, the crime is so severe that it is punishable. Continue. It's only a short one. That orphans in their presence, the social office prohibition.
Kevin's completely right. It extends not only with Lashon Hara, but also in terms of that cannot be able to provide for themselves. In the old days, women certainly didn't have the amount of education they have now, nor the same amount of financial opportunities. So you couldn't harden your heart and prevent looking after them. And society is often judged by how they treat the weak. It's all very well to be nice to people that can do something for you. It's not always easy to be nice to people who can do nothing for you and are vulnerable. So that takes a different level of sensitivity. And I think what's great about America, for example, is it mixes democratic, capitalistic ability to an opportunity to earn money with the social consciousness of looking after those that can't look after themselves. And I think that's our ideal society. It's neither capitalistic nor communistic, but socialistic consciousness with capitalistic opportunity. So, Kev, thank you very much for teaching us. I really appreciate it. As I'm going to explain to you just one or two opening principles quickly before I go through the Bava Kamma. It comes in two parts. Okay? So the first part is this. The first part is explaining what a hekesh is, and the second part is explaining what a gezerah shava is. Right. And then the Bava Kamma comes in two parts. Now, a hekesh, by all definitions, is when one verse appears after the other to teach us a principle. In other words, I'm talking about what my sort of food preferences are, and then the next verse I say, well, go to the restaurant and order us food, and then you can deduce from the previous verse what I like to eat. Does that make sense? It's sequential. It's most often sequential, the hekesh.
Okay.
Right. Let me just show you an example. If you look at Shmot, Exodus chapter 40, okay? The tabernacle, this is the law in number 39 about how to set up the Mishkan and the 39 principles. They put up a screen for the entrance of the tabernacle. I'm just going to go a little bit before. You know, and what's involved with the building. Okay, he took the pact and placed it in the ark. He fixed the poles to the ark and covered the top of the ark. Can you all follow the reading there?
Yeah.
All right, Kevin, you can follow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and the setting of the bread before the Lord. So that obviously includes everything about crushing the grain and baking and taking the wheat and growing, etc., etc. So what's going to happen as we go forward is you can see that they talk about the tabernacle. Now the tabernacle is Hamishkan, the Mishkan. Okay, so now we know that it talks about the tabernacle. Now look over here. It says, "For over the tabernacle a cloud of the Lord rested by day, and fire would appear by night in view of the whole house." Okay, so what happens is it talks about. Just let me see a little bit earlier on. Here, when Moses had finished the work, can you see that?
Yeah.
So what it discusses in Exodus chapter 40 is that it talks about the tabernacle, it talks about all the work that was involved in the tabernacle, and immediately it discusses about the Lord resting from his work, and then it goes on to about speaking about Shabbos. So there, that is a hekesh, because it goes from the one theme of the tabernacle directly to Shabbos. So there we infer about what constitutes work, both by Moshe and the people of Israel's definition of what work entailed, as well as the fact that Hashem rested on that day, and the link between Hashem resting and the work was finished. Does that make sense? And then when it talks about the laws of Shabbos, that you shall refrain from work, that's a hekesh. That's a what do you call it? A sequential theme that goes from one to the other. So that's known as a hekesh. Now, Gezerah Shabbos is slightly different. I'm going to share with you where that's from. Is from Nida 22b. I'm going to share my screen now. Does that make sense? Any questions?
No. How frequently does it happen? Is it quite frequent?
Well, it's not always that frequent, but I mean, specifically, if you look at our most important laws of Shabbat, which is one of the big ones. I mean, you know, how do you define a Jew? By keeping kosher and Shabbat. That's one of the most famous ones and the most important ones that you can actually derive halacha from it. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Now, I was talking about what a Gezerah Shava is on both sides. Now, I want one of you to read this. Just give me 1 sec, guys. Okay. Does Gavin ask, do you want to read?
Yeah, I can read.
The Gemara answers, the difference is with regard to that which Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel says in the name of Rabbi Yishmael. With regard to the exegetical principle of verbal analogy. With regard to any verbal analogy that is not free at all, one cannot derive halachot from it. If the verbal analogy is free on one side, according to Rabbi Yishmael, one can derive halachot from it, and one cannot refute through logic, even if they are valid. What? Counter arguments. Okay.
Counter arguments, right?
I'm reading from a very small screen at the moment. According to the rabbis, one can derive halachot from it, but one can also refute its logically if there are grounds to distinguish between the two cases. If a verbal analogy is free on both sides, everyone agrees that one can derive halachot from it, and one cannot refute it logically.
Okay, excellent, mate. So, all right, when I used the term free, Arthur made me crack up with laughter. He said, what, is it on special? So, the free is the term that's used in the Gemara, in Nida and 22b. What we mean by free is exactly Kevin and Gavin's words, which Arthur understood better. The free is actually the term used in the Gemara, but it doesn't mean that you don't pay for it. Free means that you are able to have it available for something else. That's what they mean by free. That the basic verbal analogy is not used to add clarity on the actual verse you're reading in the Chumash. The minute you need it to explain the Chumash, it's not free to be able to derive anything other than a nice idea. So if it's got a whole succession of words, generally a Gezerah Shavat needs two parts. It's the one particular parsha source and another parsha source where they share similar wording, in fact, identical wording in the same order. And when the two parshas share identical wording in the same order, it's coming to teach you something. But the strength of that is dependent on how much you need the words, either on either side, both sides, or neither side. So let me explain to you what that means. What we're saying is as follows. If in either of the parsha verses, those extra words are needed to add clarity to the parsha or the principle which you're learning, they're not free. They're not available for something else. They might teach you a nice idea if you have similar words in another parsha where you can put an idea together. But this concept of availability means that if they're superfluous and unnecessary words for you to derive the meaning of that particular parsha, and the second parsha, the words are also free, in other words, available, where you can understand that separate parsha without those additional words, that becomes a very powerful Gezerah Shava, where you can take those sets of words and even derive halacha from it, Jewish law. But if it's free on only one side, meaning one of the parshas you need the words to explain what's going on in the parsha, but the other one you've got those extra exact words which you don't need, there is a halachic opinion that you can derive halacha from it, but you can also refute it logically if there's grounds to distinguish between the two cases. The minute you've got it available on both sides, you can derive halacha that you can't even refute it with logic. Does that make sense? Where the halacha from scriptural sourcing trumps any sort of logic. Because one of the logical things that you can work against it is saying that this principle of halacha doesn't necessarily apply because these words are not available to be able to use them freely without explaining the parsha. Therefore, it's a nice idea, but you can't actually have halacha that is untouchable. In other words, no logical grounds can break it. Does that make sense, guys? And in fact, if we read a bit further, I'll continue reading this.
Okay. The Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Yishmael, what difference is there between a verbal analogy that is free on one side and a verbal analogy that is free on both sides? In both cases, he holds that one can derive halachot from it and one cannot refute it. The Gemara answers, he holds that the difference is that in a case where there are two mutually exclusive verbal analogies, one that is free on one side and one that is free on both sides, we disregard the analogy from the free on the one side.
Okay. And it just says, and derive a halacha from the analogy that is free on both sides. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing the principles of a Gezerah Shava. Does anybody have any questions so far?
No, how common is that? That's quite.
It's quite common. We learn it in Sanhedrin quite a bit.
Yeah, I remember coming across them. I never really understood it properly at the time. So you really clarified it for me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the Gemara did that. And thanks for a good reading, man. It made sense. Any questions, Kev?
I just want to see an example of it. It just needs to understand the concept. Let's just see it in black and white, so to speak.
No. Listen, the concept has nothing to do with the example because the example will change in parsha to parsha. What I want you to do is explain to me the concept as you understand it.
So if in a, like it was in Nida there. Nida is a concept.
Yeah, Nida 22b, that's right.
Okay, so if the words are, every word is required to explain a concept, and if you take those words away, it won't make sense. Then those words are required. But if those words are surplus, and it won't be and they won't be required, and it won't be a problem if they're not there, then if it relates to other parshas or other Gemaras with those similar words that are also surplus, then you learn a halacha from that.
Okay, explain it in a simple way for somebody listening for the first time. I know you've got it. Explain it in a simple way.
Simple way. I thought that was okay. So if there, but I won't use Gomorrah. So if there's a concept that requires certain words, and without those words it won't make sense, then those words can't be used anywhere else, or can't be used to deduce another law.
I'm a bit confused. I'm not criticizing you. You do understand it, but I'm confused by the way you're explaining it if I was listening for the first time, because I just want you to set up a step by step. Does anybody want to take a stab at it? Kev, I know you know it. It's just to explain.
Okay, to explain it like a much more user-friendly way.
Yeah.
All right. You want me to give it a shot? But I actually thought Kevin did a nice job. But just
No. I know Kevin understands it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I wanted to give an over for a layman. Art, you want to take a stab at it?
No. I'm still trying to grasp what's going on.
All right, that's the point. So this
okay.
is the
No, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Yep.
I'll take a step. Okay, so I don't know if it's easier than Kevin. I'm going to try. So just basically what I would say is that if you want to derive halacha using a Be'er Shava, so if it's in a different parsha and there's superfluous words there that don't change, that aren't required, and there's superfluous words in the current parsha that you're in, and the words match identically or very similar, then you can derive a halacha from it. If the words don't only match on the one side, then you can derive halacha, but if it can be argued with logic, then the logic will supersede the Gevurah Shava. That's it.
Okay, so that's pretty accurate. So it's based on what Kevin said. So let's break it up in 4 easy steps.
Okay, now
First thing of it is, let's answer the question, what is a Gevurah Shava? So what is a Gevurah Shava? It's when that the Torah wastes no words. That's your first principle when you build a Gevurah Shava, that everything mentioned in the Torah, it's not Shakespeare. It doesn't use words for the sake of it. It's as brief as anything. How do we know it's brief? Is that when you go through the history of Bereshit, of Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and their lives, etc., it doesn't give you a blow-by-blow on every aspect of their life. It gives you lessons about what you need to learn, and sometimes it can skip 20, 30 years, or 5 years, or whatever it is. So the very fact that it's brief and concise means that it doesn't waste words. So if there are extra words, this is the principle of a Gevurah Shava, it's meant to teach you some hidden messages. Does that make sense? That's your first thing. So how strong are those hidden messages will depend on certain factors. So the Gevurah Shava is when you take, when there are certain words in a particular order that the probability of those words appearing in sequence twice are quite remote. It's very, very unlikely. And since it's very unlikely, there's definitely a linking concept between two of these different parshas that share those common words more than meets the eye. And we're not taking the common words as and the and if. We're talking about, for example, words that are very specific in nature. So what we do is to form a Gevurah Shava is we look at the whole Chumash and we see words that are in common, that are unusual words, and see where they appear repeatedly. Because if they appear repeatedly, there's obviously some common thematic link that joins them. Okay, so that's the premise that I just wanted to add to Gavin and Kevin. I understand it completely. But that is the premise that has to be set up when you're explaining the Gevurah Shava, what in fact it is. Now that we've understand that, we have to say the second step. What are the principles that govern a Gevurah Shava? Kev?
Principles.
Yeah, you and Gavin did very well in explaining the principles. What I was explaining now is what is a Gevurah Shava, which has to be explained before the principles are given.
Well, the word Gevurah means decree.
Correct. So that's exactly Gevurah Shava, exactly that. It's a decree. But the degree at which it becomes valid as a decree is halacha, it's law. So it can only become valid as law. There's a difference between teaching an idea and when that law is so strong that if you break it, there are very serious spiritual consequences. So that's what governs the laws of a Gezerah Shava. Explaining what a Gezerah Shava is just what I put now for introduction to Arthur. Does that make sense, Kev? Okay.
No, that was very good.
That has to be explained before the laws are given.
Was a bit different to what we said. It's the
No,
same thing, but
you guys did well. Kevin and Gavin explained to Arthur the exact laws that govern the Gezerah Shava. But you have to know what a Gezerah Shava, the purpose of it is. So now that we've explained the purpose, exactly as Gavin and Kevin said, is that the laws that govern it is the stronger the Gezerah Shava, the more it becomes law. So it goes from a scale, a spectrum, and at a spectrum of 2, for example, it teaches you a nice idea. At a spectrum of 10, that law is binding. That there's a huge punishment for transgressing. That's the difference in the spectrum, the scale. Are you with me, Art?
Yeah.
And it's inflexible. You can't change it. It's strong.
It's strong when there are 2 factors. That the first Parsha reference and the second Parsha reference have got those words that are linked in the 2 respective Parshas, the Gezerah Shava, those words in the right order that are not necessary to explain either Parsha. In other words, it's known in Needed 22b as free words, meaning they're not needed as an integral understanding for the respective Parshas. When neither of those words that they have in common are needed to explain the Parsha in either context, that is the strongest Gezerah Shava. It's a 10 out of 10. And what that means now is that you can pretty much apply the halacha that you get out of that as absolute law, which cannot be criticized by any sort of logical argument. That's the strongest Gezerah Shava. 5. Your slightly weaker Gezerah Shava, at what you'd put at about a 6, is a Gezerah Shava where the words are not needed in one particular context of the Parsha, but are needed in the other context. In other words, the same words would be needed in the one source to explain that what that Parsha means clearly, but when those words are repeated in a completely different Parsha, they're superfluous, they're unnecessary, and you can get around understanding that Parsha without those extra words. So that's known as free on one side, according to Nida 22b. If it's free on one side, it is halacha, but you can argue it and have different opinions based on logical refutation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But those arguments are just arguments. They don't. Can they? If it's a good argument, can it supersede the halacha?
Yes, according to the opinion, we often have a case where a rabbi holds at a certain opinion and a different rabbi disagrees. Of course. At the end of the day, we listen to most of the time today what the Rambam says and how it's brought down in the Mishnah Berurah and Shulchan Aruch. I'm talking eventually how we learn it today. So it does take the side of a particular opinion. But if you look at it in the Gemara, there are those that would not hold by that particular opinion then, and some that would. So if it can be, if there could be logical refutation, meaning a solid logical argument, some people would hold the scriptural verse of the Gezerah Shava would still stand, and some would say the logical argument would stand. In other words, the logical argument is entitled to a fighting chance if the words are not free on both sides, that they needed at least on one side to explain the literal meaning verse of the Parsha. Now, when it's free on neither side, meaning those Gezerah Shava, the common words in the 2 different Parshas offer, and the probability is low, but those words are needed in both Parshas to explain the Parsha. In that particular case, then that gives you over a very nice deep idea, but you can't base halacha on that because those words are not free for another concept. They're not available for something else because they need it as an integral explanation to the Parsha. So the more those words are available for a Gezerah Shava, the stronger the Gezerah Shava is.
Understood.
More they need it. If they can be used.
Yes. So there's only three particular options of a Gezerah Shava on the spectrum. Strongest Gezerah Shava is when the words that they have in common in the right order between the two different parshas are not needed at all to explain those respective parshas on either side. Then that word availability makes it so strong that the halacha derived from that Gezerah Shava is even stronger than any logical argument you could bring against it, because you can't refute it with logic. Your middle of the road Gezerah Shava in terms of strength is when it's free only on one side, but the other part of those words are needed to explain the parsha. There is an opinion that there is halacha that you can derive from it, but it is susceptible and open to logical criticism, according to some rabbinic opinions, as we learned from Nida. And then the weakest Gezerah Shava is when they're not free on both sides. Those words are not available, so they'll teach you a nice, deep concept, but they certainly won't teach you halakha. They can't be used for halakha.
Can I just ask you something? I just want to ask you a quick question. Is it possible, in your experience, where you can have a Gezerah Shava which goes three ways? So let's presume that there's three words in your current parsha and in two other parshas, and it's all the same. You think that's possible or not really?
Gavin, I don't have enough experience to know the application of the Gezerah Shava. That you'd have to speak to Rabbi Cohen. From what I've seen, it's generally in two cases, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't occur in three cases. I'm just not aware of.
Yeah, I'm just saying it'll be quite tricky. What do you do then? But that's fine. It's fine. It's just a general question. It's fine. Thank you, Damon.
Yeah, I must be honest. It's out of my pay grade. I don't know.
Yeah, it probably doesn't. It probably doesn't, because Hashem puts them in there. So I would presume not.
I think the clearer Hashem is, the more it helps everybody. So, okay. Does that make sense to you now?
Yeah, I'm getting it. I'm going to listen to this video again on a specific part explaining the 4 different points. I have listened a few times till it sinks in. He explained it well. It just takes me, like, you know me, it takes me a while to, once I got it,
yeah,
I got it.
Just sometimes you've got an expression where I don't know if you're interested, you're bored, you're not getting it, you're getting it. It's difficult.
It's something in my eyes. So sometimes I do this just to help me, focus.
Okay, but no, I get it completely. It's just that often, like, it just looked like, okay, like, all right, how long? How long is it going to take? How long? Okay. Listen, you know what?
How long? I got the time on top. I know how long.
Okay, I know you're counting down the seconds. All right, so
9
listen,
minutes,
the
39,
thing is,
37.
it does help to do your own sort of thing. When I use the term free, it was the term from the Gemara, meaning available. Okay. It was the term meaning available. So, all right, guys, I think we understand the principles of the Gezerah Shava and the Hekesh well enough now. So now that we understand the principles, I just want to go through a few more minutes, and I'm not going to take a lot of time. I'm not going to go through the Gemara today. The reason I'm not going to go through the Gemara today is we've got about 9 minutes left. And I think I'm just happy if we end off strong, where you guys can understand some of the issues at play. That's what I'm interested in.
Are we going to, is this Gezerah Shava is an example of it going to be brought into the Gemara? Are we going to see it?
Yes.
Okay.
But
so you were building us up for this whole thing, Damon. You were building us up towards the
grand finale. The reason why I said the example doesn't help is because the Gezerah Shava is a principle that applies to different commonality of words in different parshas, and the examples would change from piece to piece. But the point is that you came out of this, Kevin, with a very good definition, and you explained to us how the rules of the Gezerah Shava work. You understood it.
No, it's all because of you yesterday explaining, or the day before. I just was
the only thing
paying
that
attention.
We had to add to that, because your explanation of how the rules are governed is exact. The only thing we had to explain is what is a Gezerah Shava and why is it used. That was my only introduction, but you understood it great. So, why this whole thing came about is very straightforward. We said, listen, there's a problem. You're using an example of a sheretz, and it's the same as using a zaf. It's only tamei, impure until evening. So what does that have to do with rendering a mat that's exposed to air tumor of a human corpse, tumor for 7 days, impure for 7 days. How do you get, if we learn the rules of kal v'chomer with a dayu always comes to restrain a kal v'chomer, saying if you're using the source of what is the known factor, which is the zav or the sheretz, which we know is only infected until evening, how can the mat, when it's exposed to corpse tumor, be impure for 7 days before being put in a mikveh? That was the question. And the reason we bought the Gezerah Shav is we said, listen, it's much stronger than a kal v'chomer. It's actually law. So the minute you have that instead of a logical derivation, it's a much stronger argument. So although you use a Gezerah Shav and you can use a logical argument within the Gezerah Shav, when you use another tool like the Gezerah Shav, in addition to the kal v'chomer, it's irrefutable. So there's two opinions. It's that the reality is, if you have a Gezerah Shava, then you don't have to apply the source law of the known factor to the unknown factor of the target area with a Gezerah Shava.
Okay.
That's number one. That's why it's mentioning because a Gezerah Shava, because we're the same when it comes to sheretz and zav. It's just impure until evening. And in fact, there's a part in the Gemara that basically brings an issue that says that there's a particular verse where it says, any tumor that you contract from a human corpse shall not be less than 7 days in duration. And what does this actually mean? It means that because there's a scriptural source for it, based on the Gezerah Shav and certain principles, that the dayu to limit it to tumor until evening wouldn't apply, because the corpse tumor is even more stringent. I'm just going to share my screen for 1 second, and you guys will know exactly what I'm talking about. Just 1 second. I'll just see where it is. Just give me a sec, guys. I'm so sorry about this. Yeah. On the 7th day, you shall wash your clothes and be clean, and after that, you may enter the camp. Okay? So that is the scriptural verse that it's actually talking about, that the 7 days of scriptural source supersedes the application of a daya, because it's so stringent to be within the tent of a human corpse. But you can only do that with a kal v'chomer and Gezerah Shav in combination. Otherwise, with the kal v'chomer, you need to apply a limiting principle with the dayu from the source law to the top.
Can I ask you a question? Would
Sure,
this also happen to be the thing where you said Shiva as well? Because apparently you said Shiva also for 7 days with the corpse.
Okay, so that's
died.
actually very interesting that Arthur's asking, is there a link between sitting 7 days of Shiva with the being tameh with the corpse? It's actually something I never thought about. I think it's brilliant. I think there might very well be a connection. There very well might be a connection.
I can tell you something.
Yeah.
On sitting Shiva, sorry, I actually heard something from that rabbi that I follow. Rabbi, what's his name? I can't remember, but it doesn't matter. What he says is that the 7-day I think you're 100% correct. I do think there's some sort of link, but the way the 7 days works is that it takes the body 7 days in order because it's got to adapt. So from the funeral, it's present there, the spirit, the neshama, and the neshama is in the house as well, but it starts leaving gradually and gradually. It takes 7 days. So that's the whole process.
Gavin's right. There are two aspects to it, Arthur's and Gavin's. Gavin's aspect is the spiritual letting go of the identification that the soul has with the body, that it's a period of 7 days and 30 days, that the soul comes to the conclusion, and it has a withdrawal period where it psychologically has to cope with not being part of its body. So that's a withdrawal process, which is most intense in the 7 days, and then gradually within the 30 days becomes less intense, and within a year, even less intense. But on a practical level, Arthur, you're completely correct, because the family is with the body in the tent. They bury the body in the tent, and then the body, the people are tuma. But the one problem that I have with it being practical halacha, of it being the Shiva period, is if you're impure, what are you going to make everybody else impure for by coming into contact with you and touching you and wishing you long life? That's my only practical problem with it. In other words, if you... No, come on.
How does that work? That's a good point.
If you've identified the body and you're checking that that there's no... Say God forbid, a child finds the parent and they're doing... they're checking the vital signs and everything, and they realize the person's passed. Then the child is impure, okay? Then they bury the body and he's still impure, and while he's in that state of impurity, everybody is coming up to shake his hand and hug him and wish him long life. Now everybody becomes impure.
It's a very valid point. And I'll tell you something, a lot of people as well, before they bury the body, often there's a special room, I'm talking about here at West Park, there's a special room where you can actually view inside the coffin. It's not a nice experience, but you can actually view. So there's people that do that.
But Gavin, that's for sure.
Again, exposure to the body. No. No, the body, the person might have died somewhere else. So you might not have been exposed.
Gav, you're not hearing what I'm saying. I'm saying there's something with tumor called air contamination. If you're in a tent or you're in a room.
No, I'm talking about current scenario.
I'm talking about currently. If you don't touch the body, just hear what I'm saying. If you don't touch the body and you view the body just to check.
Yeah, that's the problem.
There's still air tumor. We don't have the paraduma today, so I think we're not worried about it. This is the air contamination we're talking about.
No, I agree with you. We're actually on the same page. I think you misunderstood me, but we're on the same page. I agree with you.
Okay. So I think there is a valid connection. The only thing of it is, why would you infect everybody else? I don't know. I think it's a good, strong question because there's definitely a link.
Yeah.
I just going to have to ask somebody that's brighter than me.
Okay.
Well, that's going to limit it then. You shouldn't have said that.
Nah, it's not. On average, I just do good prayer.
It's only about 2 people in the world, you know, and God's not available at the moment.
And one of them's the Cohen, and God's not available. 100%. Yeah. Well done. Eliyahu Anavi is going to have to come and sort you out, Damon. He's the only one. Every question I can't answer, either Damon can, otherwise we have to wait for Eliyahu Anavi.
You know what, guys? Watch this thing by Rabbi Ron Cohen and me later, just for 5 minutes.
I'm going to watch it.
Just skip the first 4 minutes until he shares the screen.